In October of 1972, a plane crossed the sky with no idea it was carrying history inside it. There was nothing unusual about the flight. No sense of danger. No warning signs. The passengers were young. Most of them were members of a rugby team from Uruguay. They were students, brothers, sons, friends. They talked about the match ahead. They laughed. They dreamed. None of them believed their lives were about to be divided into two parts, before the mountains, and after. The aircraft climbed steadily as it approached the Andes, one of the most unforgiving mountain ranges on Earth. A vast wall of stone and ice that stretches across South America, ancient and indifferent to human ambition. From the windows, the peaks looked beautiful, white, endless, almost peaceful. But beauty in the Andes is deceptive. As the plane continued its journey, clouds began to close in. Visibility dropped. The horizon disappeared. Inside the cockpit, the pilots relied on instruments and calculations. A small mistake formed quietly, unnoticed, but fatal. They believed they had already passed the most dangerous section of the mountains. They began their descent. In reality, they were still surrounded by towering peaks. The first impact came without warning. A violent jolt shook the aircraft as one wing struck rock. Then another. The sound of tearing metal filled the cabin. In seconds, the wings were gone. The fuselage plunged downward, sliding uncontrollably across ice and stone at unimaginable speed. Seats ripped from the floor. Bodies were thrown forward. Luggage flew through the air like weapons. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. When silence returned, the plane rested in a frozen valley more than 11,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by nothing but snow, rock, and wind. The crash killed several passengers instantly. Others were gravely injured. The survivors sat in shock, unable to understand where they were or what had happened. Cold air rushed into the torn aircraft. The temperature was far below freezing. They were dressed for spring. Shoes were missing. Coats were lost. Blood stained the snow. There was no fire, no explosion, only the sound of wind cutting through the wreckage. Those who could move helped the injured. Those who could not were left where they lay. Shock kept them alive during the first hours. It dulled the pain. It hid the fear. But shock fades. As night fell, the true enemy revealed itself. Cold. The temperature dropped sharply. Breath turned to frost. Skin burned with numbness. They gathered inside the broken fuselage, pressing close together for warmth. Some prayed, some cried, some stared silently into the darkness. They believed rescue would come quickly. Planes would search. Someone would find them. Morning revealed the truth. There was nothing. No roads, no trees, no signs of civilization, only endless snow and towering peaks in every direction. They were not near a town. They were deep inside the Andes. Days passed. Food was gone within hours. What little remained was divided into tiny portions. A single chocolate bar, a few crackers. Hunger began to change their thoughts. The injured grew weaker. Wounds became infected. Pain became constant. At night, the cold returned with cruelty. Sleep became dangerous. One by one, more lives were lost to the freezing temperatures and the severity of their injuries. Then came the avalanche. In the darkness of night, a massive wall of snow crashed down upon the fuselage, burying it completely. The survivors were trapped inside, gasping for air. Some suffocated, others clawed desperately through the snow. When morning came, fewer voices answered. The disaster had struck within the disaster, taking 8 more lives. They had survived a plane crash only to be entombed by the very mountains that held them captive. And still, no rescue. The radio had been their last connection to the world. A small transistor that could receive, but not send. Each day, they listened, desperate for any news of their rescue. Until one day, it delivered the words that shattered everything. The search had been called off. Authorities believed no one could survive in such conditions. They were presumed dead. In that moment, hope did not disappear. It transformed. Survival was no longer about waiting. It was about choice. They had reached a threshold. Beyond it lay decisions that would haunt them forever. They realized the only people who could save them were themselves. The bodies of their deceased friends and family lay preserved in the snow. They were starving. The thought was unspeakable, but the reality was undeniable. To live, they would have to do the unthinkable. It was a pact, a decision born of desperation and a profound will to survive. This was not an act of savagery, but a desperate, communal sacrifice. In this frozen, isolated world, the old rules no longer applied. They promised that if they survived, they would tell the world the truth, to honor the dead who gave them life. The mountain had stripped them of everything, and now it demanded one final taboo to be broken. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into 2 long, agonizing months. The survivors grew thinner, weaker, but their resolve hardened. They needed to get out. 2 of the strongest, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, decided they would trek out of the mountains to find help. They had no climbing gear, no proper clothing, no map. They took a small portion of the preserved flesh and started walking west, believing Chile was just over the next peak. For 10 days, they climbed. They faced unimaginable cold, exhaustion, and altitude sickness. Every step was a battle. They crossed mountain after mountain, only to find more peaks stretching to the horizon. At one point, from a high summit, they saw the truth. The vast, endless spine of the Andes lay before them. They were not a few miles from safety. They were dozens, defeated. They almost gave up. But the thought of their friends waiting back at the fuselage pushed them forward. They changed direction, heading down into a valley. Finally, after walking for what felt like an eternity, they saw a sign of life. A man on a horse across a river. They were too weak to shout. Nando wrote a note, tied it to a rock, and threw it across the water. The note began, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains." The next day, rescue came. On December 22, 1972, 72 days after the crash, the world was stunned to learn that 16 survivors had been found alive. Helicopters flew into the Andes, guided by Nando. The reunion at the crash site was a scene of pure, overwhelming emotion. They had done it. They had survived the impossible. The story of the Andes survivors is not just about a plane crash. It is a profound testament to the endurance of the human spirit. It explores the darkest corners of survival and the moral lines we cross when faced with extinction. It's a story of how a group of young men, abandoned by the world, formed a new society with its own rules, its own sacrifices, and its own definition of what it means to be human. They did not just survive. They chose to live, and in doing so, they left a story of hope, courage, and unimaginable resilience etched into the heart of the mountains. If you are struggling with difficult thoughts or feelings, please know there is help available. You are not alone, and reaching out is a sign of strength. Days passed without meaning. Time no longer moved forward, it circled. Morning arrived only to announce another night was coming. Hunger became the central force of existence. It was no longer a sensation. It was a presence. A constant pressure behind the eyes, a weakness in the limbs. A fog that wrapped around thought itself. They rationed what little food remained, a sip of wine, a crumb of chocolate, a piece of candy divided into impossibly small fragments. Each portion disappeared instantly, leaving only the memory of taste. The cold never left. During the day, the sun offered a false kindness. At night, the temperature dropped with cruelty. Sleeping was dangerous. Those who did not move risked never waking again. They learned to sleep sitting up, pressed against one another, sharing what little warmth their bodies still produced. The injured suffered silently, broken bones that never healed, wounds that turned black, pain that became permanent. Some prayed for rescue, others prayed for death. And slowly, something darker began to surface. The realization that survival was mathematically impossible. There was no food, no animals, no plants, no way to hunt, no way to grow anything, snow and rock in every direction. The thought entered their minds quietly. No one said it aloud at first. It lingered in silence, heavy and unspoken. They avoided looking at the dead. They avoided looking at each other. But hunger does not respect morality. As days turned into weeks, bodies weakened further. Faces lost their shape. Eyes sank deeper into skulls. Thoughts narrowed. Survival stripped them of complexity. The decision, when it finally came, did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. They spoke in whispers. They argued. They cried. They prayed. Some refused outright. Others hesitated. All of them suffered. In the end, reality won. Not because they wanted it to, but because death was already waiting. They made rules. They made promises. They tried to preserve dignity in a situation that offered none. This was not savagery. It was survival at the edge of human possibility. Each day became a negotiation with guilt. Each night ended with silence. Then, the mountain struck again, another avalanche. Without warning, snow crushed the fuselage once more. Darkness, pressure, screams. When it ended, more lives were gone. The survivors were fewer now, weaker, and more alone than ever. Hope flickered not as rescue, but as movement. Staying meant death. Someone had to walk. But walking meant facing the mountains, peaks taller than anything they had ever seen. Cold that could kill in minutes. No equipment, no maps. Still, standing still was worse. They prepared slowly. They stitched clothing from seat fabric. They insulated shoes with foam and wire. They gathered courage from desperation. Two men stepped forward. They would walk. Not because they were stronger, but because they were willing. They did not know if they would survive. They only knew that waiting would end everything. The morning they left, no one spoke. There were no speeches, no heroic words, only quiet understanding. As they disappeared into the white, those left behind watched until they were no longer visible. Then they waited again, but this time, waiting felt different. Because action had been taken, and beyond the mountains, something unknown was unfolding. The mountains did not welcome them. They rose higher with every step, as if pushing back against the idea that anyone could escape. The two men walked slowly, their bodies already broken long before the journey began. Every breath burned their lungs. Every step felt borrowed. They carried no certainty, only a fragile belief that moving forward was better than waiting to die. Days passed. Snow swallowed their footprints as soon as they were made. The cold never loosened its grip. At night, they dug into the snow to protect themselves from the wind, pressing their bodies together for warmth. Sleep came in fragments. Fear filled the spaces in between. Food was almost gone. Their strength faded. There were moments when the mountains seemed endless. Moments when turning back felt easier than taking another step forward. But they continued, not because they were heroes, but because stopping meant the end of everything. On the 10th day, the white began to break. Rock gave way to earth, snow thinned, the air felt different. Then, something impossible appeared. Grass, green, alive. Tears came without warning. Soon after, they saw animals. Then smoke in the distance. Civilization. When they reached the first human being, they could barely speak. Their voices were weak. Their bodies skeletal, but they were alive. The rescue moved quickly after that. Helicopters reached the crash site days later. What they found stunned the world. Against all logic, against all probability, people were still alive in the Andes. 16 survivors emerged from the mountains. Their survival was celebrated, but the story did not end there. When the truth came out, the world struggled to understand. Judgment followed. Debate erupted, but those who were there knew something others could not. Survival is not clean. It is not noble. It does not follow rules. It demands choices made in darkness, under pressure no one should ever face. Those who survived carried the mountains with them for the rest of their lives. In their memories, in their sleep, in their silence, they crossed a threshold few humans ever reach. And they returned changed. This was not a story about death. It was a story about what it costs to stay alive. and how far a human being can go when there is no other choice.